Welcome to Terrifying Tales, the channel dedicated to telling original horror stories. Werewolf of the Railroad Moon. Royal Gorge, Arkansas River, Colorado, 1879. The flames of the campfire danced in the reflection of Patrick Watson's eyes. Shadows swayed and stretched along the endless rock face of the gorge. The night sky above was clear, but the light of the full moon and stars was unable to stretch into the depths of the gorge. When he'd signed on to work for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, the idea of working with his hands appealed to him. The fact he was here now wasn't in his plans. Surveying for the railroad was a dangerous profession at the best of times. Isolated ahead of the camp, there was the ever-looming threat of the Native American tribes, robbers, even the rival rail company Santa Fe. Things had taken a darker turn recently. Surveyors were going missing, 10 in the last week. That's how he found himself here now. Volunteers were hard to come by for the job, even with double pay now offered. People figured the extra money wasn't worth having if you weren't alive to spend it. They held a draft and called Patrick's name, along with 3 others. Mr. Tully, in an effort to put their minds at ease, sent them with 2 guards. A young gun for hire, Henry Talbot, and a mean son of a bitch named Pete Kenny. "What's on your mind there, Paddy?" James asked. Paddy turned to see his friend eyeing him with concern. "Just thinking about how I can't catch a break," Paddy replied. "Just when I think I've finally got him made, I'm sent on a job that has a good chance of killing me." James chuckled. "Way to look at things positively." The spit landed in the dirt by Paddy's boot. He looked up to see Pete standing over him. A sneer plastered over his face. "Chicken shit," he muttered, climbing on his horse. "Don't worry about him," James whispered. "Heaven help anyone stupid enough to take Pete Kenny on. We'll be fine." He moved around the fire to sit beside Paddy. "To tell you the truth, I'm more worried about the work. I don't know the first thing about surveying." Charlie and Steve broke into song over their cups. Both men had started drinking before the sun dropped and hadn't slowed since. "Time to drain the lizard," Charlie slurred. "Good idea," Steve called. "I'll come help you find it." They both staggered into the darkness of the gorge. "With any luck they don't come back," Pete muttered. The pale light of the moon managed to filter its way into the gorge. Paddy couldn't help but look at the ridge high above. Movement caught his eye. What was that? What was what? James craned his head skyward. Pete gave a grunt. "Don't get your knickers in a twist, ladies." He unholstered his pistol. "Stay with the powder puffs, Henry. I'll go check it out." Pete wheeled his horse and vanished into the darkness, the same direction Charlie and Steve had travelled. A few minutes passed by. "Charlie and Steve should be back by now," James whispered. Henry chuckled. "I'm sure they'll be fine. No doubt Pete's whooping their ass, but they'll be back." Paddy eyed the young gunfighter on the grey horse. "Can't be older than 16, he thought. Paddy couldn't be sure, but he figured he saw fear in young Henry's eyes in the flames of the campfire. Paddy felt the hairs on his arms rise despite the warmth of the fire. "What the hell was that?" James breathed. "Just a coyote," Henry said, cocksure confidence in his voice replaced by a tremor. James shook his head. "I've never heard a coyote sound like that." Paddy knew he was right. The 3 men's eyes remained unblinking on the darkness of the gorge ahead of them. Closer than the howl. A high-pitched scream followed. Beating hooves revealed Pete's horse, riderless. It rushed past Paddy at the campsite and continued out of sight. Henry drew his pistol. "Pete, you out there?" "Help!" Charlie screamed as he sprinted toward the campsite, his dirt-stained shirt and face drenched in blood. Charlie's eyes grew wide as he stopped suddenly. He fell forward on his stomach and screamed as something unseen dragged his body back into the darkness. Charlie's scream cut off, leaving the gorge in silence, save for the licking flames of the campfire. Paddy's eyes remained on the darkness of the gorge. Neither he, James, or Henry dared breathe as they waited. The ragged, heavy breathing was first. Something big was lurking in the darkness, watching them. The shape began to take form as it edged its way forward. As the flames flickered, the eyes glowed. The men could see it was big enough to tower over them all. Disbelief clouded Paddy's mind at what he saw. The powerful body, covered in thick black fur. Arms thick as oak, punctuated with razor-sharp claws at the ends, matching sharp teeth in rows inside its menacing jaw. Paddy stood frozen to the dirt. This was a wolf like no other. It stood tall on two legs, bigger than any animal he'd ever seen in his life. The bullet struck the wolf in the chest despite Henry's trembling hand. Time stood still for a moment. Paddy's eyes grew wide as the wolf simply stood as if nothing happened. Its eyes locked onto Henry, and its face twisted into a snarl. The wolf charged at Henry. The boy screamed as the wolf tore him to the ground. Screams of agony and the tearing of flesh filled Paddy's ears. Henry pulled the trigger into the beast. Clicks of the empty chamber replaced the gunshots, but still he pulled. Blood sprayed across Paddy's boots. "Come on!" James screamed, dragging Paddy's arm. The pair ran into the darkness. The heavy thud of their footsteps echoed all around them. Henry's screaming rang in their ears well after it ended. William Bonney, or Billy as he preferred, sat on the floor with his back to the wall. Moonlight filtered through the bars of the small window, offering light to the cell he'd called home since March 21st. Many nights he sat since that day, knowing he'd made the wrong decision to trust Governor Lew Wallace. The promise of a full pardon in exchange for testimony against the murderers of Houston Chapman was an offer he knew was too good to be true. It seemed to Billy that the governor intended to kill two birds with one stone, and his neck too would soon meet the hangman's noose. Almost 3 months had passed since he had given testimony, yet here in his cell he still sat. The heavy door at the end of the hall opened. Billy jumped to his feet. No one had ever visited him this late before. The corridor was well lit as moonlight filtered in from the windows of every cell. A well-dressed man, unfamiliar to Billy, made his way towards his cell. The clothes were expensive, as was the gold chain pocket watch adorning the fine coat. This man wasn't from Lincoln. Stay long enough and you learn not to flaunt your wealth or you die for it. The shadow cast from the peak of the gentleman's hat prevented Billy from seeing his face. The man stopped short of his cell door. "So you're the one they call Billy the Kid?" Billy remained silent. The man chuckled. "I find it's not often a man's moniker befits the holder." The man lifted his head, revealing a weathered face, but well-groomed grey beard. "Mostly they're made to strike fear, build theatre, or enhance reputation. I see you're the exception to that rule, Mr. Bonney. You are a Billy, and you are indeed a kid." Billy found his patience waning. "Are you going around checking the accuracy of nicknames, or do you want something else?" "Direct," the man smiled. "I like that." He slid a stool from the wall and placed it on the floor outside Billy's cell and took a seat. "I have a proposal for you, Mr. Bonney, if you have the time to hear me out." Billy sat on his cot. "You'll have to make it quick. I have another engagement in 5 minutes' time." The man laughed. "I promise to make it brief. Son, my name is Edmund Tully. Have you heard of me?" Billy shook his head. "It's no surprise, I suppose. They've locked you in here for many months now. I represent the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad." Billy remained unimpressed. When you surrendered, Mr. Bonney, the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railroad were building through Colorado, specifically the Royal Gorge. Since that time, my company won the right in court to continue building the line through the gorge. Santa Fe took some convincing, but I'm in control now. Billy didn't need Tully to elaborate. He was well aware of what the word convincing meant to a man like him. Did you do any of the killing yourself, Mr. Tully, or did you pay others to do it for you? Tully laughed again. I've never been a gunslinger, Mr. Bonney, but you are right. My money certainly attracted men capable enough to act in my stead. What do you want from me? Billy asked. You said you're in control, and you've already got the hired guns. Tully's brow creased. I need more, Mr. Bonney, but I need something else too. You seem an intelligent lad. By now I suspect you've guessed there's no pardon for you. Billy nodded. Your name carries great weight after the Lincoln County Wars, Mr. Bonney. I could use that name. The Santa Fe crew keep attacking my rail camp, killing my workers and hired guns. The ones that aren't being killed are leaving quicker than I can replace them. On top of that, the Ute people had an existing relationship with the Santa Fe boys and are raiding our provisions whenever the opportunity presents. The rail build is at a complete standstill. Either the Santa Fe boys or the Ute people are killing my surveyors. There was something else Tully was going to add, but he stopped himself. Billy caught the pause, but remained silent. Mr. Bonney, Governor Wallace is a personal friend of mine. He's held off from ordering your execution as a personal favour to me, to give me enough time to approach you with my offer. What makes you think I'm up for making any more deals with gentlemen, Mr. Tully? Billy asked. You come with me now, help me get the railroad moving, or you'll see the noose tomorrow. To me it's an easy choice, but allow me to try and sell it. You help me, and I'll see it you'll get your pardon you were originally promised. There's one thing that exceeds the long arm of the law in this country, Mr. Bonney, and that's money. One thing my railroad promises, if it gets moving, is money in the hands of the right people. I'm not asking you to trust me, Mr. Bonney. I'm asking you to trust the greed of men. Tully stood and extended his hand through the bars of the cell. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Bonney? Billy eyed the man with contempt. He didn't miss the hypocrisy of the man's sales pitch. Tully could use all the words he liked. If he shook the man's hand, he still had to trust Tully's word over greed that he would get his pardon. But he wanted out of the cell. Billy rose from the cot and shook Tully's hand. How's this going to work? People will wonder why I'm being let out. Tully chuckled. I keep forgetting you haven't been kept abreast of the current news, Mr. Bonney. He pulled a newspaper from his coat and passed it through the bars. The headline read, Kid Escapes. You escaped custody on the 17th of June, Mr. Bonney. Your execution tomorrow wasn't going to be public. You were set to become a legend, never seen or heard from again after your escape. Billy shook his head at the headline, and the sketch of his face that looked more a stranger than himself. Tully turned and headed back toward the heavy door. I'll be back at dawn to see you free, Mr. Bonney. I'll have your personal effects. We have a long journey to Colorado ahead of us. The gentle clack of the rails hummed through the car. Billy was still getting used to the weightless feeling on his wrists. It was the first time in months he'd been free of shackles outside a jail cell. He didn't miss the fact that he stood out. His dusty shirt and pants were a stark contrast to the refinery enjoyed by the men and women seated around him on the car. Mr. Tully was pulling out all the stops. He understood. He wasn't isolated. Billy found himself sat with wealthy investors, directors and power men of the railroad. The fear he enjoyed. Those powerful men offered furtive glances or kept their heads bowed and didn't eye him at all. The looks from their wives were a different matter. Disdain and wrinkled noses were the contribution to his welcome. Billy was familiar with the looks of the handful of children aboard. Wonder and awe. To those few children present, Billy was seen as a character of fiction, someone to admire, a hero. Mr. Tully cleared his throat. "I promised you your personal effects, Mr. Bonney." He lifted a satchel from the bench beside him and placed it on the table between them. With a deft twist, Tully unwound the leather binding, revealing the contents. His dusty coat, his hat, his belt, and most importantly, his Colt Lightning revolver. Billy's eyes remained on the contents of the satchel, but he heard the collective held breath of the other passengers around him. "Thank you, Mr. Tully." He stood and placed the hat on his head. Next came the belt, followed by the coat. Billy deliberately left the pistol until last. Nobody in the train car had taken a breath yet. There was even a look of trepidation on the face of Tully. Billy allowed himself the time to appreciate the moment. His fingers found the handle of the revolver and curled around. It was still loaded. Billy peeled the side of his coat behind the holster and placed the pistol inside. The collective sigh of relief brought a smile to Billy's face. "With that part of the business finished, I think it's high time we had a drink," Tully said, breaking the silence. "I couldn't agree more, Mr. Tully." It seemed strange to Billy seeing the full moon hanging in the sky through the train car window free of bars. "It won't be long now, Mr. Bonney," Tully said. "We'll be at the rail camp before the hour's up." Billy found the eyes of a young boy staring at him from the table opposite. The boy was seated by a young woman with matching blonde hair and blue eyes. His mother. Billy guessed her close to himself in age. She quickly cradled the boy and turned his head away. Billy turned back to see Tully eyeing him with suspicion. "My daughter Elizabeth and grandson Thomas," he said. "Forgive the boy. He's just curious. He's never seen an outlaw in the flesh." "No bother," Billy said, flashing Thomas a wink. The train lurched. "What the hell?" Tully muttered. "How hard is it to keep a train on the tracks?" Billy wasn't so sure it was the driver. "I think it came from the back, Mr. Tully." Tully signalled to a man standing by the train car door. The man took off toward the back of the train. "Expecting trouble, Mr. Tully?" Billy's lips curled into a smile. "Other than me, I mean." Tully shook his head. "Can't be too careful, Mr. Bonney. As I told you before we departed, there's been problems with the Ute people, the Santa Fe crew. Unfortunately, precautions have been necessary." Billy noticed the empty seat opposite him. "Where's the boy?" "He left to fetch a snack before the train shunted," Elizabeth said. There was the slightest hint of a quiver in her voice. Billy stood. "I'll go check on him, make sure he's okay." Thomas, ever curious, followed behind his grandfather's guard toward the back of the train. The man had his pistol drawn. Thomas believed he might be lucky enough to see a gunfight. The man entered the last car of the train, and Thomas waited unseen by the door. The rear car was in darkness, the back door ajar, flapping violently as the train sped along. Thomas watched the shadow of the man edge slowly through the car. The sound Thomas had never heard before travelled over the sound of the train. To Thomas it sounded like a roar. He crept into the car for a closer look. There was something at the end of the train car in the shadows. It was standing, but it didn't look like a person. His grandfather's man let out a scream as he was lifted into the air. His body was tossed like a rag doll, landing at Thomas's feet. The young boy stood frozen, unable to take his eyes from the blood draining from the stumps where the man's arms had been. Heavy footsteps shook the floor as the enormous shadow inched closer to Thomas. Moonlight bathed the shadow for a moment. Thomas stared into the glowing eyes above him. The young boy trembled as saliva from the razor-sharp teeth dropped onto his head. "Look out, kid!" Billy drew and fired. Pistol shots deafening as they echoed through the train car. The shadow roared with surprise and staggered back as the bullets hit. The beast tumbled backward through the open door onto the train tracks. "You okay, Thomas?" The boy stayed mute. Billy lifted him and carried him to the front of the train. "Thomas!" Elizabeth snatched him from Billy. "What happened back there?" Tully demanded. "I heard shots. Where's Douglas?" "You aborted, Mr. Tully. Your man's dead." The crowd car erupted in panic and the accusations flew. "How do we know you didn't kill him? Why is a criminal on the train?" Fury burned in Elizabeth's eyes. "My son is speechless. You murdered someone in front of him?" Billy waited for the noise to die down. "I consider myself a very good shot, but even I can't tear both a man's arms off with 6 shots. "He's telling the truth," Thomas whispered. "There was a monster on the train. It killed the other man. Billy shot it off the train when it was going to eat me." Tully took 2 men and headed toward the rear of the train. Billy sat down and poured himself a nip of whiskey. Tully returned white as a sheet. "Wants to talk his nonsense. But Mr. Bonney certainly wasn't responsible for Douglas's demise." "Who was it?" someone shouted. "Did you get a look at them, Mr. Bonney?" Tully asked. Billy shook his head. "Too dark. Just a shadow, but the bullets worked okay." "It was a monster." Tears welled in Thomas's eyes. Elizabeth cradled him. Tully gave a knowing nod. "I'd say you've proven yourself capable of the task even before we've arrived at the Gorge camp, Mr. Bonney." He gave Thomas a gentle pat on the head. "It's clear to me from the savagery committed on Douglas and what the boy thinks he saw in the dark that the Utes are responsible." Confusion painted the faces of the other passengers. "The Ute fashioned the skins of all sorts of beasts and are prone to wear them. Clearly that's what the boy saw." Tully brought his hand to his beard. "Explains something else too." Billy downed the nip of whiskey. "Explains what?" Tully sat and poured himself a glass. "The last attack on the surveyors. 2 workers made it back to camp, babbling about a giant animal. I sent men to search. They found one of the hired guns, a man named Pete Kenny. He was thrown from his horse and knocked out. There was no sign of the other workers or Pete's partner, Henry Talbot." "What'd they say happened?" Billy asked, his interest piqued. Tully downed the glass and poured another. "Nonsense. Nothing but nonsense. The only one who made any sense was Pete, but he'd been knocked out cold before he saw anything. Given what the boy thinks he saw, I'd say the workers were attacked by the Ute and got spooked by costumes and war paint." Billy thought on the words as his gaze drifted back to the full moon. He wasn't sure about Tully's theory. Whatever he'd shot cast a bigger figure than any man he'd ever met. By the time the train arrived, the railroad camp was in complete darkness with everyone sleeping. Tully led him to his personal carriage, not wishing to wake anyone else and setting up a sleeping area in the bunkhouse. Billy slept through the majority of the next day, making the most of his first night in a comfortable bed in some time. He figured his next bed would be less expensive. The sun was setting as he emerged from Tully's carriage. His appearance drew curious eyes and hushed whispers from the workers as they passed. None were brave enough to engage him in conversation. He reached for his pistol when he heard the shot. Billy relaxed as no one else seemed surprised. He wandered to the back of the carriage to see young Thomas awkwardly holding a pistol. Billy leaned on the rail unseen, curious as to what the young boy was up to. A number of glass bottles were resting on top of a large rock. The revolver shook in Thomas's hands as he held it in front of him. The bullet zipped into the face of the rock and careened away. Thomas dropped his arms in frustration. "What are you doing there?" Billy asked. Thomas jumped. He hid the pistol behind his back. "Maybe I can help." Billy wandered over. He gripped Thomas by the shoulders and turned him back toward the bottles. "Now bring the revolver up. Show me how you hold it." Billy grabbed Thomas's arms and straightened them. "Now lock your shoulders. Don't let your arms move." He leaned on the boy's arms, making sure they were locked. "Good. Now use the side at the end of the barrel to line up one of those bottles. Have you got it?" Thomas gave a nod. "Now put your finger on the trigger. Now when I tell you to, squeeze it. Don't pull it." Billy took a step back. "Take a deep breath. Let half of it out and hold the rest. Thomas sucked in a breath and blew half of it out. Now squeeze the trigger. The bottle exploded on top of the rock. Thomas turned with a smile on his face. "You're a quick learner," Billy said. "What's going on here?" Elizabeth said, hurrying over. "Get away from my son!" She snatched the pistol from Thomas and shoved it into Billy's chest. "A man should know better than to give a gun to a child." Billy pulled his coat back to reveal his revolver resting in its holster. He held the handle of Thomas's pistol back toward her. He was already out here shooting. I figured if he was going to do it, I'd teach him how to do it properly. Elizabeth snatched the pistol and turned on Thomas. "What were you doing out here with a gun, Thomas? You know better." "I need to know how to shoot if I'm going to shoot monsters like Billy the Kid, Mama." His eyes were glued to the dusty ground. "That's enough about monsters, Thomas." Elizabeth turned back to Billy. "You're a bad influence, Mr. Bonney. Stay away from me and stay away from my son." Thomas gave Billy a wave as Elizabeth dragged him away. "Are you always such a charmer with the ladies?" a man in black asked from the shade of Tully's accommodation carriage. Billy eyed the unfamiliar man with suspicion. "I find talking rarely achieves anything." His hand came to rest on his holster. The man smiled. "I tend to agree with you, Mr. Bonney. But seeing as Mr. Tully is intent on us working together, I say we give talking a try anyway." The man covered the ground slowly and extended a gloved hand. "The name's John Holliday, but people call me Doc." Billy gave Doc's hand a shake. "I recognise you from the papers." Doc chuckled. "You haven't gone unnoticed by the pencil pushers yourself, Mr. Bonney. Come on, I'll show you around." The pair strolled toward the centre of camp, drawing the attention from workers and hired gunmen alike. "Mr. Tully was eager for your services, Billy. I wasn't sure he had the pull to clutch you from the pull of the noose. I guess he's got more money than I thought he did." Billy noted Doc was in the know enough to understand how he came to be in Colorado. "What brings you here, Doc?" Billy asked. "Well, I'm about as popular here as you are, maybe less." Doc opened the door of the large wooden bunkhouse. "I've been sleeping here for a few months longer than the other boys." He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from under one of the beds. "I'm what the other boys call a turncoat." "What's that supposed to mean?" Billy asked. Doc led the way back outside. "Well, I was originally here with the Santa Fe boys. When the court ceded control of the land to Tully, I accepted his offer to stay on as a hired gunman." He sat on a bench outside and motioned for Billy to sit beside him as he poured 2 glasses. "It makes the other boys uneasy. There's been a few gunfights with the remnants of the Santa Fe boys. I think they expect me to forget which side I'm fighting on and shoot one of them." Billy laughed as he accepted the glass. "The way I hear it, not a single Doc Holliday bullet ever missed its mark, so I do understand their unease." Billy took a sip and took his hat off. The moon was full again, or as close as it could get. "I thought you were going to show me around." Doc pointed behind him. "That's where you sleep. The horses are behind that. And this is the rest of the camp." "Wow, not sure I'll remember all that," Billy said. Pete Kenny wandered towards them, most of his men in tow. "What's your new girl's name, Doc? She's a pretty one." Billy eyed the man coldly. Now, Pete. There's no need for unpleasantness," Doc said. "We're all on the same side here." "Are we?" Pete asked. "Maybe next week you'll be back with Santa Fe." His men gave a chuckle behind him. "What's your name, boy?" Billy ignored Pete's question. "What a surprise. Another yellow belly for us to babysit." The slight wasn't acceptable. Fury lifted Billy from the bench. He unholstered and drew down before Pete could reach his holster. Billy noticed a slight tremor on Pete's lip. "You sure it's me who's yellow-bellied?" "You pull the trigger and you'll be dead in seconds," Pete spat. A smile pursed Billy's lip. "Maybe. But you and 5 of your men will be dead before that happens." Doc stepped between the pair. "This is William Bonney, Pete. You may have read about him in the newspapers. They call him Billy the Kid." A murmur rose through Pete's men. "Now I know for a fact that neither of you gentlemen are yellow, so rather than measuring pecker size, how about we take a breath?" Billy kept his revolver raised. Pete's hand hovered over his holster. Pete, I'm trying to give you an out here. Mr. Tully is going to be pissed off if you kill him, and he's going to be pissed off if you get killed and your men leave. Doc shook his head. You're not going to like how this ends if you push your luck too far, Pete. Elizabeth walked by with Thomas. Pete relaxed. Billy reholstered. There's only one thing that gets a man's blood pumping more than a fight, Pete spat. I would sure like to get a taste of that sweet honey pot. Shame about the slow kid she's always dragging around. Pete! Billy pointed his finger at the man with a shake of the head. Pete Kenny, I've heard of you. The man puffed his chest out. I expect you have, boy. Yeah, Billy said. You're the man who fell off his horse and got knocked out instead of protecting the surveyors. Oh boy, Doc groaned. Pete charged forward with his fists raised. I'm going to shut that pretty mouth of yours. Doc jumped between the men again. Gunshots rang out around the camp. Shouts of panic erupted as the workers hurried for cover. Pete barked orders at his men and hurried away. Doc breathed a sigh of relief. I've heard of trouble finding people, Billy, but I've never seen a man as eager as you to find it. Upsetting Tully's daughter now, Pete? Rifle shots kissed the dirt a few feet away from his boots as he hurried with Doc towards the stock pen. Either they're the worst shots in history or they aren't trying to hit us at all, Billy realised. Gunshots carried from the stock pen. Billy arrived to Pete's shit-eating grin. Looks like we don't need Billy the Kid after all. The stock pen was littered with a handful of bodies of young Ute men. Blood stained the dirt around their dead or dying bodies. Tully hurried over. What's going on here? Situation under control, Mr. Tully. The Utes attacked and we stopped them, Pete said. Grabbing the coyote pelt from one of the bodies. I told you it was them. He tossed the bloody pelt at Tully's feet. All that horse shit about monsters. Here's your monster, a boy wearing rags. Tully balled his fists at his side. I want you to run them off. Send them a message. They won't delay the railroad any longer. Kill them all if you have to. We can do it right now. Pete studied the faces of his men. But we want double wages. Tully stared the man down. Do it. We'll sort the wages when you get back. Normally Billy cared little about who lived and who died. This was different. The Ute were just hungry. They weren't trying to hurt anybody. The bullets were landing nowhere near them. Half of them would have been gunned down running to the stock pen if the sniper wished. He stepped forward to speak up. Doc's hand landed on his chest. His eyes told Billy to keep his mouth shut. When we ride, stay near me, he whispered. Saddle up, boys, Pete shouted. Not 5 minutes later, Billy found himself a horse, trailing Pete's men into the night. Doc was whistling a tune by his side. Don't worry yourself, Billy, he said. There's excitement coming, but it'll happen before we see the Ute settlement. The courage from adrenaline and bloodlust wore thin the further they travelled. The laughing and joking between Pete's men had ceased completely. They led the horses into a small canyon with a short rock face on each side. The moon couldn't break through, and the shadow swallowed the men. The first crack sounded from above. A body thudded to the ground and the horse bolted. Ambush! Came the cry. Men on horseback rode in from either end of the canyon. Santa Fe boys! Gunfire erupted from above and through the entirety of the canyon. Billy drew his pistol. Doc stayed his hand. Please don't, he said. I prefer you as a friend. Doc drew his pistol and shot one of Pete's men point blank. The blood sprayed under the canyon wall. The man slumped in his saddle and hit the dirt. With his foot still in the stirrup, the horse bolted from the canyon, dragging him along the ground. A roar echoed over the gunfire. The shooting stopped. Billy finally drew his pistol. The moments of disquiet passed like hours in the darkness. Shallow breathing echoed throughout the canyon. The first scream tore through the night air, high-pitched, unlike anything Billy had heard in his 20 years. Not like a man shot. This was something else, something desperate. Gunfire coupled with panic shouts, more screaming. In the intermittent flare of gunfire, Billy caught a glimpse. The enormous beast stood on two powerful legs. Razor-sharp claws hung from the end of each arm. It seemed spoiled for choice, unsure of who to attack. Bullets thundered into its body from both the Santa Fe boys and Pete's gang. "What do we have here?" Doc breathed. A powerful claw shot forward, cleaving the head from a horse's neck. The rider plummeted to the dirt, trapped beneath the body of the horse. The rider screamed as the beast stepped on his head. His skull exploded with a pop of bone. The beast craned its head skyward and let out a howl of triumph. Billy couldn't believe his eyes. This was a werewolf. Men stopped to reload their rifles and pistols. The werewolf seized the moment and charged. Blood sprayed the walls of the canyon in a sea of black under the moonlight. The canyon filled with a chorus of screams and gunfire. Horses crashed to the ground as the wolf tore through their legs, dropping the riders. A man fired at the wolf as it charged at him. The canyon filled with the clicking of his empty chamber. He fumbled to reload. As the man brought the pistol up, the wolf ripped his arm from his body and tossed it aside. The severed hand pulled the trigger, shooting another man in the chest, killing him. Men gave up the fight and started running for their lives past Billy out of the canyon. The wolf wasn't finished. It tore through the fleeing men one at a time. A man cowered down against the canyon wall. The wolf towered over him. It opened its jaw and brought it down on the man's head, tearing it from his body. It spat it out with disdain. This wasn't food, it was sport. More than half the men present were dead in the canyon. "I think we should probably depart, Billy," Doc whispered. Billy gave a nod. The wolf's eyes found him. It charged toward him. Billy unloaded his pistol. The wolf powered forward and leapt through the air. Billy turned his horse. Too late. The wolf's powerful claws tore through Billy's thigh and the body and neck of the horse. Billy's head rocketed into the canyon wall as the horse dropped, knocking him out cold. Billy's mind was clouded in fog as he felt the sunlight kiss his face. The pain in his head paled compared to the pain in his leg. He tried to speak but only managed to moan from his lips. "Just hold on a little longer, Billy," Doc whispered. "We're almost there." Billy drifted back into unconsciousness. Billy's eyes opened to the roof of an unfamiliar tent. The faces of the young Ute women around him grew concerned and they hurried out. Doc's face peered through the flap. "For a moment I didn't think you were going to remain in the land of the living, Billy." Billy coughed, his throat dry. "Where are we?" "The Ute settlement," Doc said. "I wasn't entirely honest with you, William, I must confess." Billy's eyes closed. He fought to open them again. "I never stopped working for Santa Fe. That ambush last night was orchestrated. Our master planned to win the railroad back from Tully's company. The Ute agreed to help us. Our boys have been hiding out at this settlement for a spell." The ache in Billy's head was still present, but the pain in his leg was gone. Too scared to look, he asked, "How's my leg?" Doc's forehead creased. "Yeah, about that." Doc helped Billy to his feet and led him outside. "I told the chief what happened last night. He wanted me to take you away from here when I told him that thing cut through your leg pretty good." "Why am I here then?" Billy asked. Doc smiled. "I'm one hell of a negotiator." His smile faded. "It cost me a lot of money to convince him." Billy looked around the settlement. Only members of the Ute tribe were present. "Where's the Santa Fe boys?" "Most weren't as lucky as you were," Doc said. "The handful that made it out of that canyon found their courage had left them, and they've moved on looking for other opportunities." The chief of the Ute was seated by a large campfire. Smoke billowed into the dusk sky, touching the first light of the stars. Doc helped Billy down beside the chief. "He wishes to explain some things to you." "I'm not going to understand a word of it," Billy shrugged. "I'll interpret," Doc said. The chief never took his eyes from the flames as he spoke. His voice deep and melodic. Doc listened intently. Billy felt the pain easing in his head. It was strange, but he almost felt like he was in full health again. The chief abruptly stood and walked away. "What did he say?" Billy asked. "Well," Doc began, "it was a story I wouldn't have believed yesterday, but after what I saw with my own eyes in that canyon, I'm willing to believe just about anything." Billy waited patiently. "He says the Great Spirit was angered by the disruption of the land caused by the railroad. The shapeshifter's mission was to restore balance to the land and eliminate anyone who caused the disruption. The chief says that's why it's left the Ute people alone and attacked the men working for both railroad companies. Is that all he said? Billy asked. Unfortunately, it's not, Doc replied, pointing to Billy's leg. Billy looked at his leg for the first time. He was filled with surprise. The wounds had scarred over already beneath the tears in his pants. He said, "The Great Spirit has cursed you. You're going to turn into one of those things every full moon until it consumes your heart completely, and you're never human again." The weight of the words wore heavily on Billy. It sounded ridiculous, but somehow he knew it was the truth. Is there any way to stop it? He says there is a way. What is it? Billy asked. A silver bullet to the heart of the creature that inflicted the curse, Doc replied. You have until the next full moon, Billy, or the curse is forever. The next full moon's a month away. Billy shook his head. The chief returned holding something. It was a small silver necklace. He placed it into a small bowl and held it into the fire. Billy and Doc watched as the man fashioned a single bullet. The chief placed the bullet into Billy's hand. Thank you, Billy said. How do I find the wolf? Doc spoke words Billy didn't understand, and the chief spoke once more. Doc listened. When the chief finished speaking, he bowed his head and walked away. What did he say? Billy asked. Doc thought for a moment. He said you won't change until the next full moon, because the curse is young. But the chief thinks there's still enough power in the waning moon this close to a full moon for the other one to change. So how do I find it? Easy, Doc said. It's going to continue its mission for the Great Spirit. It's going to attack the railroad camp at the Royal Gorge and kill everyone there. Thomas, Billy whispered. Take my horse. Doc tossed Billy his gun belt. She's already saddled. She'll get you there quick, and she knows the way well. I'll arrange another one from the Utes and follow as quick as I can. Those are Pete's boys that made it out alive saw me draw down on them. They know I set 'em up, and if they saw me leave with you, they'll assume you're against them as well. Billy put the silver bullet in the pocket of his shirt. He didn't want to waste it on anything that wasn't the wolf. He rode into the night, the moon rising on the horizon. Billy dismounted on the outskirts of the railroad camp. He inspected the barrel of his Colt Lightning. Seeing 6 bullets, he gave the barrel a spin and snapped it back into position with a flick of his wrist. He wasn't sure what sort of reception he could expect. Billy had been knocked out in the canyon. He didn't know if they'd seen Doc carry him out. Pete already wasn't his biggest admirer. He wasn't sure if Pete's boys viewed him as friend or foe anymore. There was still good news if they opened fire. Of the 40 that entered the canyon, Billy counted only 5 or 6 moving around the camp on his way in. With his coat shifted aside and his hand hovering above his holster, Billy edged his way forward. One of Pete's boys burst from the bunkhouse door carrying a whiskey bottle. The men locked eyes. What are you thinking? Billy wondered. The whiskey bottle dropped from the man's hand and smashed on the ground. He reached for his holster. The crack of the Colt Lightning dropped the man dead before he could draw. "It's the kid!" came the cry. Bullets fizzed and popped as they danced around Billy and kicked the dust off the ground. Billy spun and fired 2 shots, dropping the 2 men shooting at him from behind. He ducked and spun back around and dropped 2 more. The final of Pete's boys stood 20 feet away in the open. A grin on his face spread from ear to ear. "One left, kid," he spat, his rifle levelled on Billy. "I've got you dead to rights. I'm going to be famous." "I only need one," Billy said. "You can either drop the rifle and leave, or die nameless in the middle of nowhere. Your choice." The man's eyes widened, but the grin remained. Billy's eyes caught the tension shift in the man's finger. The shot ripped through the man's skull, knocking his hat into the air and dropping him on his back. "Nameless it is," Billy whispered. "You can get mad all you like, Kenny," Tully roared. "It doesn't change the fact that I won't have the money you were promised until tomorrow." "Horse shit, Tully," Pete shouted back. "I want what you promised now. Tully slumped into the chair behind his desk. "You're not listening." He put his hand over his face. "It's on a train on the way here right now, along with more men for you to lead." Pete spat on the beautiful rug on the floor in front of Tully's desk. "You really think I'm sticking around after last night?" Elizabeth was listening intently to the heated discussion through the door of the sleeping quarters. Tully and Pete's discussion had woken Thomas. In fact, it was so loud that nobody in Tully's accommodation carriage heard Billy making his way through the camp. Having heard enough, Elizabeth burst into her father's office. "Gentlemen, I understand you're both angry. Obviously, it's important that you sort this matter out now. I respectfully ask that you simply keep it down. Thomas can't sleep." Pete broke into contemptuous laughter. "That slow boy of yours needs more than sleep. You should have drowned him in a bucket when he was born." "That's it," Tully roared. "You want to leave? Get the hell out. Take the garbage you call men with you. You're all fired. Kiss the money goodbye." Pete Kenny closed his eyes. His voice took on an eerie calm. "You really shouldn't have done that, Mr. Tully." "Why?" Tully spat back. "There's a part of me I don't really share with anyone else." He opened his eyes. They shifted in colour from blue to a honey yellow. "Those who I do share it with don't tend to live too long." Pete dropped to the floor on all fours. He screamed in agony as the train car filled with the sound of cracking bone and tearing flesh. His body lurched as his back snapped backward and lengthened. Black fur spouted through the tears in his flesh. Pete's jaw cracked as splits formed from his lips and tore through his cheeks. The long jaw full of razor-sharp teeth forced its way free. The webbing between his fingers split as sharp claws bored their way free. Elizabeth cowered on the floor and crawled toward the door. Tully stood speechless behind his desk. The werewolf rose from the floor, its lips curled in a cruel snarl. It jumped on the desk, bringing its face inches from Tully. The werewolf let out an ear-splitting roar and wrapped its claws around Tully's face. It lifted Tully from the ground by the head. Tully screamed in agony. The werewolf slowly drove its claws into the sides of Tully's face. Bone splintered as his skull was slowly crushed. As the werewolf's claws met each other inside the man's skull, Tully's body dropped to the floor. The werewolf turned its attention to Elizabeth, shaking in a ball on the floor. "Mama?" Thomas said from the door. The wolf's head turned toward the boy. "No!" Elizabeth screamed. "Run, Thomas!" The wolf stalked toward the boy. Thomas backed his way back toward his bed. Elizabeth picked herself up from the ground and staggered toward the bedroom door. The werewolf towered over Thomas. The window smashed. "Quick, kid!" Billy shouted. Thomas rushed to the man's arms. The swipe of the werewolf tore through the wall of the train car, narrowly missing Thomas as Billy pulled him through the window. "Get out of there, Elizabeth. I've got him." Elizabeth turned back to the door and jumped outside. She hurried toward the back of the train carriage to get her son. "You'll be okay," Billy said, carrying Thomas. The gunshot hit the wall of the train car by Billy's head. "You'll only need one, eh?" the man said. Billy couldn't believe his eyes. He hadn't missed. Blood trickled down the man's face from the bullet hole in his skull. He's not in a good way, Billy realised. The man swayed from side to side, struggling to stay upright. "No!" Elizabeth called as she saw the man with the rifle levelled at Billy and her son. The man continued to sway before levelling the rifle. Billy knew the shot would be a good one. He dropped Thomas to the dirt. This bullet was for him, not the boy. Thomas huddled next to Billy's feet. The werewolf crashed through the back of the train car. Billy and Thomas found themselves cut off from Doc and Elizabeth. The werewolf let out an intimidating roar. Its eyes settled on Billy. Thomas hid behind Billy's legs. Billy's fingers found the silver bullet in his shirt pocket. He backed up as he emptied the rounds from his revolver. He slid the silver bullet in the barrel and flicked it back in place. The werewolf's claw smashed into Billy's side, knocking him through the air. The Colt lightning flew from his hand and hit the dirt. The werewolf towered over Thomas once again. "Run, kid!" Billy yelled. Thomas's tiny fingers found the handle of Billy's Colt lightning revolver on the ground. Billy's words echoed through the young boy's mind. Lock your shoulders. Good. Now line your target up with the sight at the end of the barrel. You got it? Take a deep breath. Let half of it out and hold the rest. Now squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. The werewolf dropped to its knees. A groan escaped its lips as it slumped to the dirt with a thud. The wolf's breathing shallowed until it stopped. Elizabeth rushed over and picked Thomas up, and they all watched as the body of the wolf changed. Pete's dead eyes looked skyward, a perfect bullet hole in his chest on full display. I can't say I'm surprised, Doc said. Pete was always a disagreeable individual. Are you sure you have to leave? Elizabeth asked. The sun was rising for the day. Afraid so, Billy said. I believe my full pardon died with your father. I'm sure I can do something about that, Elizabeth replied. My name carries weight with the governor. It's also Tully. Billy smiled. Based on my previous experiences with Governor Wallace, he tends to promise one thing and do another. Thomas's eyes welled with tears as he stared down at the dirt. Billy took his hat off and popped it on the young boy's head. You take care of your mama. I know you know how to do that now. Thomas wiped his tears on his sleeve and nodded. I'll keep an eye on him until the train arrives today, Doc said, shaking Billy's hand. Where are you headed, Billy? The world's shrinking quickly for you these days. I figured I'd give New Mexico a try, maybe head to Fort Sumner to see in the new year, Billy said as he mounted his horse. Now, trouble is running as far from you as it can, Billy, Doc said, but knowing you, you'll find it and aggravate it anyway. With a final wave, Billy the Kid rode off toward the horizon. If you like what you heard, please like and share the video. Please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. And remember, the dark plays tricks with our minds, but sometimes it's not a trick. Sometimes there really is something there.